Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time you happen to be watching this. I hope you're having a wonderful day. Today, I want to talk about the research proposal. It's probably sounds a lot more formal than it actually is going to be. The big goal I have with the research proposal is that everybody starts thinking about what sources are available and whether they have enough sources to do what's necessary for a research paper. So we're going to walk through what I expect. We're going to make talk about what it has to link to, and even though some of it is perhaps just a step-by-step formula, I still want to make sure everybody can understand what's expected. As always, all borrowed images and quoted text are used for educational purposes. This is an effort for me to try to go through and explain things to my students who aren't in class. This is not a monetized video. The directions are fairly self-explanatory. When you go to Brightspace and you go to the content section, you'll be able to pull up the document and it will say cut and paste the following into a separate document. Answer each of the questions completely. At times, they're going to say it should be one or two sentences. At times, it might be a paragraph or two. And we're going to just kind of go step by step through that. You submit the proposal to the appropriate Brightspace folder, and once I've approved the proposal, your research paper must be about that topic. So double check, triple check, quadruple check, and then check again to make sure A, there's enough sources. Okay, I'm only asking you to list one or two. It's your job to make sure that there are way more than one or two, because that's usually the biggest hangup. That's almost always the biggest hangup on the research paper. Can you find enough sources? The basics part one, what do you want to write about? Narrow that topic down, but this basically should be one or two sentences. Step two, we're talking through the book Hang the Moon, so I'm just going to ask you to link it to Hang the Moon. In a lot of ways, this is an exercise in justification, in just kind of almost BSing. But just be sure to have a direct quotation from the novel to support your contention that the topic and the novel are connected. And this response should be one or two paragraphs. What's your hypothesis? What argument do you want to make? Everything's an argument. As I'm recording this, it's windy and bright and about 22 above. If I say it's cold outside, I'm still making an argument that I hope people will respond to in some way or another. So, for this argument, what do you believe the research will prove? And in a perfect world, what's the title of your research paper? Now, you haven't read all the research yet. You're guessing, but the title at 6 words or so should help you get an idea of this is what I'm trying to prove. Make sure that with 2 or 3 sentences and 6 words, everything ties together so that you start having an idea of, I'm trying to prove this. And if the research doesn't back you up, you can go back to the drawing board and say, this is what the research actually proves. But right now we have an hypothesis, we're guessing. And in the perfect world, this is what we're going to show. Part four, talk about the audience. Why will anyone care? Part five, submit a format with 2 sources. They should be found in JSTOR, EBSCO, or available as hard copy. They should be at least 3 pages long, and they should be published in 2013 or later. I used to be really hardcore about being in the last 3 or 4 years. But I think that's just has become a struggle for some students. If you're doing something scientific, if you're doing something technological, then I'm going to tell you it should probably be 2022 or later. But if you're doing something different, something more historical, some of the things that one can find from 2015 or something might still be valid. If I see a lot of tech stuff and the sources seem to be 2013 and 2014, I might talk to people about trying to find more recent stuff. Caveats. Look, I reserve the right to reject some proposals. For example, I don't think a biography is a valid thing for the length of this paper. A person who's famous enough to have a lot of research about is also famous enough where 4 to 6 pages won't do the job necessary. Next, I realize we live in times where angry diatribes are the way people want to communicate. But I think for the most part, if it's a hot button issue, if it's one that has people screaming and shouting and not listening to each other, I'm going to ask you to either really narrow that focus to something that's a very minuscule part of the broader issue or find something new. And just to use some basics, I was teaching high school in the 1980s. I was coaching debate in the 2010s. I coached debate on gun control issues. I read research papers in the 1980s about gun control. And if one had switched the dates, the stuff from the 2010s would have been at home in the 1980s paper, and the stuff from the 1980s paper would have fit in the 2010 debate. People don't seem to change their mind about a lot of hot button issues. They just regurgitate a lot of the same talking points, and the research that people find seems to just be a repeat of something from 30 years ago. Avoid the hot button stuff. Be sure you can find enough sources. If I recall correctly, the paper is going to ask for 4, but look for 10. Some sources are going to be inadequate. Have more than enough. Have double, triple, quadruple what you really should have. The due dates, random formatting. The final copy of this is January 31st, 11:59. Use the Google Words or Google Docs or Word default font. And remember, you're copying and pasting the 4 questions into either a Google Doc or a Word default, or Word document. So just use the default font. Sorry for the stammering there. The same heading as always. And I don't believe I have the rubric in the slideshow. Just use the Mount Martha Connecting Self rubric. Have a good thesis for your paragraph, or good thesis statement, topic sentence for your paragraphs. Just have the basics covered. Let's walk through this a little step by step, and I'm going to give you some examples. So, what's the subject matter? How can that be narrowed down to a 6-page limit? I'll talk about mine, but again, what do you want to write about? This paper should be your subject. I'm going to try my hardest to allow everybody to write about what they want to write about. All I'm going to do is ask you to link it to Hang the Moon, and I'm going to give you an example that I think shows that the vast majority of topics can be linked to the novel. So, let me show you one that can't. We've got this poster for Rebel Moon. There are no heroes, only rebels. So, what's the link? Humans should not colonize space because there would be too much violence. The movie Rebel Moon makes this point, and the word moon and violence appear in the book and film. The word moon is not enough to create a connection. I think it's entirely possible that you can talk about the rebellious nature of some of the characters and do some of that sort of thing. But again, this movie isn't actually about colonizing space and the act of colonizing space. So you don't have enough here to really deal with colonizing space. And you're not going to be writing a review of the movie. You're writing a research paper about colonizing space or proposing to. The word moon is not enough to create a connection. The hypothesis. Think about what you already know about the topic. If you're interested in it, I would hope that you know something about it. I would hope that you are not claiming to be interested in something you have never thought about before. So, what do I know about the topic? And what do I hope to prove or illustrate? I think it's important again to remember everything's an argument. And the tentative title should help you in 6 or 8 words crystallize exactly what it is you want to say, what exactly the argument is that you want to make. Okay? And make sure, if you look at this last GIF here, make sure that you can actually prove the point you're trying to make. Make sure it's entirely possible to prove that. Part of the thing of an academic study is that yes, at some point it has to be something you can prove or something that can be falsified later on, something that can be shown to be false. Make sure as you're trying to prove something, you understand that it is debatable, that it is arguable. Next, think about why should people care? I think people should care about colonizing space. All I'm asking is that you make sure that you don't think that the word moon in the title is enough to talk about colonizing space. So, why does this issue deserve attention? I said earlier I'm going to talk about avoiding biography, but if there is a person who's a key element of developing some technology, so these two things are linked, so why do these two things deserve your attention? What's at stake? In this argument, what's at stake? Why should anybody care? If there are no stakes, nobody's going to care. Nobody's going to read about it. So you care, perhaps. Why should your audience care? What can you do to make sure your audience, whomever that might be, and think about, there'll be a slide about this later, think about your ideal audience and think about why they should care. And remember, you're making an argument. You're building some contentions, you're taking some claims, you're linking them together, you're using the data to support those claims, and you're having warrants that explain why the data supports your claim. What sources are available? More importantly, what good sources are available? And then we're going to use the MLA works cited citation format. It's the English department. It's what the English department uses. And then finally, I mentioned this before, but who are the ideal readers? How can you reach those ideal readers? And how can you limit this thing to fit the length of the assignment? Okay. How can you limit it to fit the length of this assignment? So let me give you a sample. What do you want to write about? This should be 1 to 2 sentences, excuse me. My idea is that most people fail to realize how much Bluetooth has changed how people communicate, work, and consume media. My tentative title is The Miracle of No Wires. So, in some ways, I've already hit part 3 as well here by talking about the title here, but it just seemed to me to fit into this part as I was making the slide. The connection to Bluetooth. I've got 3 quotations here. Part 1, you're smart. Part 2, Sally is apparently prettier than people thought. And part 3, people seem to want to test her as she takes over the role as the driver in Duke's organization, and she takes over other roles throughout the novel, roles that typically women did not take. Now, let me be perfectly clear. You do not have to be as detailed in this next section as I am, but to make my example work, I think you need to know a few things about what's going on. So, if I look at this first slide, I'm showing you a picture of an actress named Hedy Lamarr. I'm going to argue that Hedy Lamarr was an attractive woman, and I'm going to argue that most people seem to find her attractive because in the roles she played, she did some explicit scenes that were very, very controversial in 1933. So, link 1 is this attractiveness of Hedy Lamarr. Link 2 is that Lamarr and a guy named George Antheil developed the idea of using frequency hopping to avoid broadcasting interference and torpedoes. And in 1997, they were honored for this achievement that they developed during World War II. And this achievement is credited as being the forerunner for modern technology such as Bluetooth, Wi Fi, and CDMA. How our cell phones work is in part of the uh, technology that she developed. Second of all, she was always underestimated. If you look at this, the War Department, the Navy, thought that instead of developing ways to stop torpedo or to stop them from jamming the torpedoes to make the torpedoes more effective, she should just sell kisses to support war bonds. The idea that we have wireless phones, global, GPS, and Wi-Fi, in part because she developed the technology to help torpedoes not get jammed, and she developed a lot of other inventions as well, indicates that she was always underestimated, in part because she was attractive. And so when I get to the end of mine, I'm going to say that the connection is as follows. Hedy Lamarr, a woman who was underestimated because she was attractive, invented the technology they used to create Bluetooth. In Hang the Moon, Sally is an attractive woman whom people underestimate. More importantly, Bluetooth created a host of societal changes, and it helps people navigate those changes. Sally had to navigate societal changes caused by the Duke's death and the advent of Prohibition and the effects Prohibition had on the county that she lived in. If you can give me something like that, it's a long stretch from somebody fixing an old car to having a cell phone. But I think if you can make connections like that, I'll approve it. Like I said earlier, this is an exercise in creativity. Remember, the sources need to be in MLA citations. MLA is going through the idea of containers. So think about the author, think about the title of the source, the container that you saw the source in, the numbers, the publication date, the location of the source. So, 2 quick ones here. An article from JSTOR, you've got the author, you've got the title, you've got the Proceedings of the American Philosophical Society, where it came from. I've got the volume and the number of it. I've got the date, and I've got that it came from JSTOR. And then this one, which would I think be a hard copy from the New Yorker. Again, I've got the author, I've got the title, I've got the fact that it came from the New Yorker. I also have this as a link so that if I need to find it that way, I've got the link there for it. If you have questions, talk with me. If you have one question, talk with me. If you have 54 questions or however many little word balloons with questions are on my slide here, talk with me. I'll be happy to work it through with you. I want to make this as painless as possible for you. And I hope by doing that, to make things as painless as possible for me. I believe that this wraps it up. I hope everyone has a good day. Hope to see you all in class the next class period.